Claire thought the world revolved around her, until one slap turned her into the star of thousands of viral videos. She set out to prove she was always right, but ended up in court, where her rights quickly vanished. What really happened in the square, and how did it all go so wrong? Let's dive in. Claire Jenkins, 34, had the kind of attitude you'd expect from someone who never heard the word no growing up. Her suburban bubble had left her unprepared for the real world, or any world that didn't revolve around her, honestly. That day, she was downtown, standing in the city square, surrounded by a sea of tourists, snapping pictures of the Royal Guard. The guard, a tall black man with a posture so perfect it could have been carved out of granite, stood stoic as ever. His face was locked in a look that screamed, "I am unshakable." His uniform gleamed under the midday sun, and the iconic furry hat sat atop his head like a crown of authority. But Claire? Oh no, she wasn't impressed. Her morning had already been ruined when a boutique didn't have her size in a designer scarf. So, when her sarcastic comment about the guard's silly hat was met with silence, it only added fuel to her fire. She crossed her arms, tilting her head in mock frustration. "Excuse me, are you just going to stand there, Mr. Statue? What's the deal? Are you allergic to fun or something?" The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink. He might as well have been carved into the very stone of the square. Claire's voice grew louder, her words dripping with entitlement. "Hello? I'm talking to you. Do they teach you guys to ignore paying citizens, or is that just your personal style?" The small crowd that had gathered started to take notice. Phones came out. Whispers turned to giggles, then to hushed excitement. A few tourists were murmuring, "This is going to blow up online," and "typical Karen moment incoming." But Claire didn't care. If anything, the attention only encouraged her. She took a bold step forward, closing the gap between herself and the guard. Her finger was raised, ready to jab his shoulder. Before she could make contact, he moved, swiftly and decisively, stepping back in a single fluid motion. His precision made her stumble slightly, but instead of embarrassment, she doubled down on her anger. "Oh, so you do move. What's next? Are you going to break your vow of silence and actually speak? Or is that too much effort for you?" The crowd was buzzing now, half in disbelief, half in awe of her audacity. And then it happened. The moment Claire would regret for the rest of her life. Her hand lashed out, a quick slap across the guard's cheek. The sound echoed in the square like a firecracker going off. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people instinctively stepped back, as though they'd just witnessed a natural disaster unfold. The guard turned his head slowly, his icy glare cutting through Claire like a blade. His voice, calm and deliberate, broke the tension. "Ma'am," he began, his tone sharper than any shout could have been, "you have just committed an act of assault on a member of the Royal Guard. I suggest you stop before this situation escalates further." But Claire? She scoffed, literally scoffed. "Assault? Oh, give me a break, I barely touched you. What are you going to do, cry about it? Relax, it's not that deep." Little did she know, someone behind her had already made a call, and more importantly, several people in the crowd were live streaming the whole scene. A low murmur began to build in the square as two officers emerged from the crowd. They were in uniform, their expressions serious. One of them tapped Claire on the shoulder. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "we need to have a word with you." Claire spun around, her face a mix of indignation and disbelief. "Oh, come on. You're not serious. What's the charge? Hurting his feelings?" The officer didn't smile. "Actually, it's assault on an officer, public disorder, and failure to comply with a lawful directive. You're coming with us." The crowd erupted in whispers again, some people filming the scene from every angle. Claire's jaw dropped. For a moment, it seemed like she might back down. But then, predictably, she doubled down instead. "This is ridiculous. You people are wasting taxpayer money harassing an innocent woman, while real criminals are out there running wild." As the officers gently but firmly guided her toward their car, the guard resumed his post, expressionless once more. The crowd parted, letting the officers lead Claire away, her protests echoing across the square. From behind her, someone muttered, "Well, she really made history today." And just like that, the square returned to its usual hum, leaving Claire Jenkins to face a storm of consequences she never saw coming. 10 minutes later, the once picturesque city square looked more like the scene of a blockbuster disaster movie. People swarmed like ants around a picnic, all buzzing with theories and opinions. Phones were raised high, capturing every angle of the unfolding drama. Some were live streaming, others narrating with exaggerated commentary, and a few were probably already editing memes. And right in the middle of it all stood Claire Jenkins, chin raised, arms crossed, and voice louder than a fire truck siren. "This has to be some kind of joke," she yelled, glaring at the officers who had arrived on the scene. Her tone was laced with indignation, as if she'd just been told her favorite coffee shop ran out of oat milk. "You're all blowing this way out of proportion. I have rights, you know." The officer in charge, a middle-aged man with a calm but increasingly tight-lipped demeanor, was trying his best to de-escalate. His voice was steady, though his patience was visibly wearing thin. "Ma'am," he began, "this is not a prank. What you did is considered assault, and not just any assault. An attack on a royal guard while he was on duty. There are witnesses, there's video evidence." But Claire cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, please? Video evidence of what? Me giving him a love tap? Let's not act like I committed some heinous crime here." The officer sighed deeply, probably questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. "Ma'am, this isn't up for debate. What you did is a criminal offense. You need to cooperate." Claire wasn't having it. She saw this as her moment to shine, or rather, to prove she was untouchable. Her voice rose even higher, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Well, I demand to speak to my lawyer. And while we're at it, I'll be filing complaints against every single one of you. This is harassment. That guard didn't even have the decency to explain my rights." The crowd by now was eating this up. Someone muttered, "This is straight up a Karen masterclass," while another added, "She's so deep in the hole, she can't even see the shovel." Claire, oblivious to the viral storm brewing around her, continued her tirade. "Do you even know who I am? I pay taxes. My family has lived in this country for generations. And this is how you treat me?" The officer didn't flinch. He gestured to his partner, who stepped forward with handcuffs. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. If you resist, we'll have no choice but to use force." As the cuffs clicked into place, Claire gasped as if she'd just been personally betrayed. "You're seriously arresting me? For what? Asking a question too loudly? This is a complete overreaction." The officers, unfazed, began escorting her to their car. Claire, however, was far from finished. "Mark my words. This is going to be all over the news, and you'll be the ones apologizing to me." She wasn't entirely wrong about the news part. By the time she was seated in the back of the squad car, videos of her rant had already racked up thousands of views online. One popular clip featured the caption, "Karen versus Royal Guard. Guess who wins?" At the station, Claire's bravado started to falter, though she masked it behind a facade of indignation. She sat in the processing room, tapping her foot impatiently. "When is someone going to explain what's happening?" she demanded, her tone dripping with entitlement. One of the officers, clearly done with her antics, leaned over and said, "You'll be attending a court hearing in less than an hour. This kind of offense doesn't get a rain check." Claire blinked, stunned for the first time that day. "Wait, what? A court hearing today? You can't be serious." The officer didn't miss a beat. "Oh, we're very serious, ma'am. Assaulting a royal guard is no small matter. The judge will see you shortly." For a moment, Claire sat in silence, the reality of the situation finally starting to sink in. But then, like clockwork, she snapped back into defense mode. "Fine, let's get this over with. I'll have this cleared up in 5 minutes, you'll see." She had no idea just how wrong she was. The courtroom was nothing like Claire Jenkins had imagined. Small, cramped, and way too quiet, it felt less like a place of justice and more like a scene from a true crime documentary. The air was heavy with tension, and every creak of a chair or a rustle of paper echoed like a drumbeat. As Claire stepped in, her confidence took a noticeable hit. Gone was the swagger she had flaunted in the square. Now, she was just another defendant trying to figure out how this all spiraled so far out of control. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the stoic faces of court officials and the unmistakable presence of reporters scribbling furiously in their notepads. At the center of it all sat the judge. a stern-looking man in his 60s whose piercing gaze seemed to cut straight through Claire's bravado. He adjusted his glasses and began leafing through the stack of documents in front of him, his expression growing more severe with each page. The clerk began reading the charges: assault on a royal guard in the line of duty, public disorder, and resisting lawful arrest. Each word hit Claire like a brick. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was low, but carried the weight of authority. "Miss Jenkins, you stand accused of serious offenses. How do you plead?" Claire's throat tightened. She stood smoothing her skirt as if that might somehow help her case. "Your Honor, this is all just a big misunderstanding," she started, her tone wavering between desperation and entitlement. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I just wanted him to respond. I thought it was all in good fun." The room was silent except for the faint scratch of a reporter's pen. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Good fun, you say? Let's see if the evidence supports that claim." The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, rose to her feet. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to present video evidence captured by multiple witnesses." The judge nodded, and the screens in the courtroom flickered to life. There it was, Claire in all her glory, berating the guard, dismissing the officers, and, of course, the infamous slap that started it all. Gasps rippled through the audience as the footage played. Claire sank a little lower in her chair, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The judge's frown deepened. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his tone colder than a January morning, "are you aware that your actions constitute not just a personal affront to the individual you assaulted, but an insult to the institution he represents?" Claire opened her mouth to respond, but quickly realized she had no good answer. Her usual excuses and deflections wouldn't work here. The judge leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Your behavior was not only inappropriate, but reckless. It showed a blatant disregard for authority and the law. This is not a matter we take lightly." After a brief recess, the judge returned with the verdict. "Miss Jenkins, in light of your actions, I hereby sentence you to 3 months of community service and mandatory anger management courses. Let this be a lesson in accountability." The gavel came down with a definitive thud. Court is adjourned. Claire barely had time to process the ruling before she was escorted out of the courtroom. Her mind raced with a mix of indignation and disbelief. How had things escalated to this point? But outside the courthouse, a new reality was waiting for her. News crews were lined up, cameras flashing as they captured her exit. Social media was already ablaze with clips from the trial, complete with headlines like "Royal Guard Justice," "Karen gets her day in court." By the time Claire reached her car, her phone was buzzing with notifications. Her name was trending, but not for the reason she'd ever wanted. The world now knew her not as Claire Jenkins, suburban mom, but as the woman who slapped a royal guard and paid the price. How would you have handled this situation if you were in the guard's shoes? Do you think Claire deserved the verdict she got? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you, or anyone you know, ever experienced something similar? Let's talk about it. Your voice matters. Don't forget to like and share this story if it resonated with you. This story was created to shed light on real issues, encourage understanding, and make the world a better place. Together, we can make a difference.